You are listening to the Doing Motherhood podcast, where we talk all things Black mothers today. Hello, listener friends. It is good to see you again. So first, I want to start off by saying, you'll notice my t-shirt. It says Black Birth Work. This is the logo, our design for the Black Birth Work docuseries. I think I mentioned it before, but our producer, Alyssa Rochelle, is and I are working together. We're co-producing a docuseries called Black Birth Work. And in that docuseries, we are highlighting families who have given birth in the past few years, and they're just sharing their stories, sharing information. We want this documentary to highlight Black birth stories, birthing, women and people, and Black family legacies. So follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Black Birth Work. And for our What's the Goins On segment today, we have Raven Dorsey back for our issues in the news. So we'll get into that. Hi, Raven.
Hi Anya. Hi, listener friends. Nice
How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here. I'm excited to get into some of the issues we have to talk about today.
All right. What do you got for us?
Okay, so I have one news story and then a couple that we'll circle back on. So the first one is quite heavy. It's about Adora Perez out of California. And on last Thursday, a California court overturned the conviction, an 11-year prison sentence of 31-year-old Adora Perez for, quote unquote, causing the death of her unborn child through drug use. On December 31st, 2017, Perez gave birth to a full-term stillborn baby in Hanford, California. And according to the court documents, Perez acknowledged that she had used methamphetamine during the pregnancy, and a doctor believed that the baby had died hours prior to birth from extensive drug use by the mother. And this is all in the court documents. She was then charged with fetal murder, and this particular portion is from her advocates at the National Advocates for Pregnant Women, where they say that she was poorly advised by her court-appointed lawyer, and she was very fearful that she could possibly face a life sentence. So Perez pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced in June 2018 to 11 years in prison for a crime that does not technically exist in California. And that part is very important. The plea was then appealed and then upheld on appeal. And since then, advocates have continued fighting. And the judge in Wednesday's ruling basically said that the court should have never permitted the plea in the first place because California's voluntary manslaughter law doesn't actually apply to the unborn. And when we look at the actual case law, which California's murder law, which was amended in 1970 to include the death of a fetus, the legal interpretation is that change was intended to criminalize violence done to pregnant people, but not intended to include a woman's own action that might result in a miscarriage or stillbirth. That's a very important caveat here. And unfortunately, Perez is one of two women charged with fetal murder in Kings County that their drug use led to a stillbirth. But the other case was thrown out in earlier this year. And so what this means is that the ruling affirms that a birthing person should not be held responsible for a stillbirth or any negative birth outcome for that matter. And it also means that during this kind of time where this case law is being sorted, it means that addicted, folks who are experiencing substance use issues could avoid and might not feel safe in getting healthcare services for fear that their substance abuse could lead to criminal prosecution. So we're talking about the safety of getting care, the safety of being able to feel safe in a hospital, and what it means for this court to appeal this law and mean that Perez cannot be held accountable for her birth outcome, which is really important. Yes. The other note that I'll say is that as far as what's next, After the case was overturned, it was then immediately appealed. And so she went from prison to a county jail where she is currently. And there will be a April 6th hearing in the lower court, which will basically give her and her team the opportunity to argue that the law was intended to prosecute people who cause a miscarriage or stillbirth rather than the pregnant person themselves. So that's where we're at with this case.
You know, last season of the Doing Motherhood podcast, I had guests on from the Santa Maria Hostel, which is an organization here in Houston that works to keep families together when substance use is an issue for families and mothers. And so there was a nurse and a social worker that joined us to talk about how they advocate for these women and parents and do the work to keep their families together, their children with them. So I'll make sure to put in the show notes the link to that episode and the link to Santa Maria Hostel in case anyone is interested or needs to use that as a resource.
Absolutely. And just to correct one thing that I said substance abuse in one part of the segment. I meant to say substance use, and that's a really important clarification. Mm-hmm. The next two stories are ones that we talked about together, and there's some updates. The first one is Brittany Griner in Russia. Last time we talked about how she is currently being detained in Russia since February 17th. And since we last talked, the Russian court has extended her detention until May 19th and also denied her request for house arrest. Also, since we've talked, before there were no U.S. officials, which is common. Usually, if you are detained in another country, officials from the U.S. embassy in that country will go and visit you to make sure that you're being treated fairly and that you are safe and in good condition. That had not happened in Brittany Griner's case, which was a major issue. But since we last talked, it has, and U.S. officials were able to confirm that she is in good condition. And that she will continue to be involved in the process to make sure that she's being treated fairly, which is incredibly important. Since we also last talked, Lisa Leslie did an interview with I Am Athlete, and she shared that her and many folks in the basketball community were encouraged to not make quote unquote a big fuss about the issue, so that she would not become a pawn in the war and to refrain from making her a hashtag. Watching the interview was really interesting because it was so you could tell that it was weighing so heavily on Lisa's heart and the conflict. I think that as I read this and we talk about it, that she also felt that as well and described it as heartbreaking. And the kind of thing I think I'd be interested to hear what you think about is the tactical silence working? And do we have any way of knowing if it's working? And also what can we do, with this information, or can we do anything? And that is the kind of uncomfortable nature of a lot of the things that we'll talk about,
I just, I don't understand. I don't think that I agree that silence is any more helpful than being vocal would be, Yeah. And I just think that if for nothing else, for Brittany's own peace of mind, right? That if she is able to receive news and see that there are so many people, her friends, her family, of course, but also her fans and just the people of our nation, that care about her and that we want to know that she's doing well and that we want her to be back home. So that's my only remark.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I think I definitely feel conflicted because I want to make sure that she's safe and that if that means, that we have to treat the situation with care, I think that's important. But also we've seen so many times how not bringing particularly Black women, especially Black queer women's voices up to the forefront, can literally erase them and erase us. I struggle with that, I think, particularly. And I know that when we talk about a lot of these issues, we won't always come to like a happy conclusion. And I think like both of these stories today are examples of that for sure.
For sure.
And I just have one more story for you, which is an update on the SCOTUS hearing for Judge Brown Jackson. I know this is the tea. I mean, I don't know who else of our listener friends was watching last week, but it was an emotional roller coaster, to say the least. I think that's a nice way of saying it. But we watched the hearings for Judge Brown Jackson take place last week. And I think we saw many GOP senators, primarily white men, disrupt and interrupt Jackson when she talked at her own pace or didn't answer their questions correctly, like the way they deemed to be correct, right? To get their soundbite. And so I say that with quotation marks for the folks who are watching the video. We also saw them turn the nomination into kind of a platform for the 2022 midterms versus focusing on the actual issues at hand, because the confirmation hearings serve as kind of like a public job interview. They're meant to see and confirm that you are qualified for the job. But instead, many of particularly the GOP legislators focused on unrelated questions about critical race theory, gender definitions, being soft on crime, quote unquote, and referencing a lot of policies that are not at all under her purview as a Supreme Court judge. And to her credit, Judge Brown Jackson did an excellent job of continually drawing that line and saying, this is a policy issue. This is a policy issue. This is not an issue of case law. And we saw particularly senators like Ted Cruz asked Jackson if she believed that babies could be racist. We saw Senator Marsha Blackburn ask her to define the word woman. And we also saw Senator Lindsey Graham press her about her particular religious beliefs, which once again, do not have anything to do with her ability to sit on the bench. And then the jewel of the entire hearing was Senator Cory Booker's time with Judge Brown Jackson. And he actually took time to uplift her, which was well needed in this kind of like attack on her character. And so one of the quotes, and this is honestly probably not even like the best one, but this is one of the many good quotes, is that he said, you didn't get here because of some dark money group. You got here how every Black woman in America who's gotten anywhere has done, by being like Ginger Rogers said, I did everything Fred Astaire did, but I did it backwards and I did it in heels. And so I'm just sitting here saying that no one's going to steal my joy and nobody is going to make me angry. And his entire statement goes on and even brings Judge Brown Jackson and myself, honestly, watching it to tears. Yeah. And I think when we talk about what this means, it just means, I zoom out to like the state of Black women in this country. And I think about that even like the most qualified candidate and honestly, she's overqualified. And when you're a Black woman, like you are going to be questioned, like you don't belong there. And, she actually is one of the most qualified nominees in recent history. The only judge of all of the Supreme Court judges currently sitting on the bench that is both clerked in the Supreme Court, served as a public defender, served on the Sentencing Commission, served as a district judge, served on the Court of Appeals. I mean, and the American Bar Association has rated her as well qualified, the highest possible rating. Mm-hmm. And so it makes me feel as though like, Black women do have to continue to always made to feel like we aren't enough when we are honestly more than enough and more than qualified and more than overdue for the jobs that we are asking to be in and wanting to be in.
And I mean, just the fact that on this job interview, because that's essentially what those hearings are. It's a job interview. That the fact that the interviewers did not even understand the assignment And
Yeah.
the interviewee had to continue to bring them back to the assignment.
Like, I'm going to remind you. And I appreciated that every single time.
Every single time. Yeah, no, it was definitely hard to, and I didn't even watch the entire hearings. I watched clips, here and there. The one that I watched in full, I did watch the full Lindsey Graham clip. That was really hard and heavy. It was so hard and heavy. But again, just her ability to work through that, with the grace and the composure that she had, absolutely. But I want to make sure we should not have to do that as Black women, and especially when she sits at the pinnacle of what success in her career field looks like. It just was ridiculous.
Yeah. I really enjoy the point you said about yes, she has grace and composure, but we have to, it's not really a choice for us to get to where we want to be. Because if we were to make one slip as Black women, the consequences are unimaginable and unfair. And so we do look forward to a vote potentially taking place on April 4th. However, we can most certainly look forward to the Republican members of the Judiciary Committee delaying the vote. And they can do that by basically filing a complaint saying, hey, we didn't get this information we were supposed to, or this didn't happen the way it was supposed to. And they can continue to do that, but eventually the vote will happen. And the vote is likely to be tied. However, the committee can the majority can basically say, okay, it's going to go through anyways. So that's very common and has happened and can happen.
Okay. And when can we expect that? What date is that again?
April 4th, tentatively, with the expectation that it will probably it could take as much as a week or more longer than that to actually have the vote.
Okay. All right. Well, that gives us our issues in the news. Thank you so much, Raven, for joining us. And we look forward to what you have for us next time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, listener friends. And please let us know what other issues you want us to talk about. My Instagram is at Raven M. Dorsey. And I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Yes. All right. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, listener friends. And now we are back for the 411 segment today, the one that we've all been waiting for, because I'm going to talk about this slap. And I'm going to talk about this slap, and then that's going to be the end of the slap fiasco for me. But before we get into that, I just want to let you all know that Doing Motherhood podcast is accepting sponsorships from small businesses. If you are looking to advertise your product or services on this growing podcast that hosts to a vast audience of women, mothers, professionals, creatives, and birth workers, this is the time to get on. I will be putting a link in the show notes so you can follow that link. If you're interested, let me know. We'll get you on. Also, ways that you can support the podcast. You can support Doing Motherhood podcast by subscribing and sharing wherever it is that you listen to the podcast. Or if you watch on YouTube, go ahead and give me a follow and a subscribe over there. You can leave a review wherever you listen or watch the podcast. And listener friends, I would love for us to engage more on Instagram. I'm going to have more content coming too, so I know that's a two-way street. But I especially want to hear what you all have been thinking about this episode. So that's how you can support the podcast. And getting into it. So the 411, I'm talking about this Oscars fiasco between Will Smith and Chris Rock. And let me just get into it. So let me tell you first how I came upon it, okay? My son and I had been out at the university incoming freshman thing, right? He and I took our selfies out there. So I got home and I'm trying to upload the selfie. I get my selfie onto Facebook, engage a little bit, and then I go over to Instagram. And as I'm about to post it on Instagram, I see this breaking news someone posted that said, Will Smith just slapped Chris Rock on the Oscar stage. And I was like, what? Like, it didn't even comprehend. Like, I was like, this is crazy. What are they doing at the Oscars, right? So I go to find it. The first thing I found were still shots. I didn't even see the video. I saw still shots of the slap, and it was like, you know, the sequence of events, like from Will walking up to the slap and after. And I was so appalled. Like, it didn't register to me how that could happen. And of course I thought it must be a skit. Like, what is going on? Then of course you find the video, and then we all saw the video and the outcome and what started. We saw it all. So I don't even want to get into all of that. But I'll say this was my take on that day. And this is what I shared, part of what I shared on my Instagram page. My personal view on violence, or well, what I talked about first is that violence is oftentimes not physical, but we don't see it that way in our society. And so people don't realize, or I don't know if people don't realize or people don't care, but that like violence is not only physical, and that violence that is in the form of humiliation or joking around or emotional or psychological abuse, verbal abuse, like that is all just as damaging as physical violence. So anyway, what I went on to say is that my personal view on violence is, if you bring it to me in mine, you'll get it how I'm living at that moment. Like, that's what it is. Like, that might look like words. It might look like hands. It might look like we don't ever speak again. It might, I don't wish to ever be in a situation where I feel like I am forced to physically violate someone, right? That's not the way I want to live my life. It's not what I want to do. But I do also understand that sometimes things come to that, right? Like in real life, like this isn't Disney. We want people to be their best selves at all times, especially out in public, especially on grand stages, especially, at events as large as what the Oscars are, and specifically for what it was for Will Smith that night and that film. And so anyway, don't want that. But guys, you act, whatever comes back is what comes back. And unfortunately, everyone does not live by the law of the land, right? Like some folks, street justice is what it is. So again, I'm not condoning or advocating for physical violence, but in reality, if you're not careful, and if you are disrespectful, and if you use any of the other forms of violence, you just kind of got to know that it can come back at you whatever way it does. Having said that, it broke my heart to see what happened at the Oscars last night. This is what I wrote on Monday, for many different reasons and on so many levels. And so the reasons and the levels. So the first thing is that it was like watching like your two favorite uncles get into a fight. And you can't believe that this happened. Like if this were at a family reunion or like seeing two elders in church, like just go at it. Again, it happened in a space and a place, and it happened between two people that I don't think we've ever thought would find themselves in that position, right? I grew up loving both of their work, admiring their place in our cultural zeitgeist, specifically in African-American culture, but also who they are to mainstream culture. They have made a huge mark on the arts, and they've made a huge mark on how Black people are seen within majority culture through media. Also, knowing their personal experiences with violence. Will has shared his story about witnessing abuse from his father to his mother and feeling inadequate about that and feeling insecure and like a coward because even as a very young child, he felt he had some responsibility to step in. And Chris Rock has shared his experiences being bullied his entire childhood and through his teen years. And so as shocking as it was, and as, everyone got caught up in the hype, but at that moment, I just felt this great deal of humiliation for both of them and for all of them. And I think that it is an unfortunate situation for all. I also think that it's just shocking and it's sad all around. I don't feel the need to take a side. Like, I'm not like, Will is wrong, Chris is wrong. Like, I don't feel like anybody needs to be taken down or things like that. But it's just unfortunate, and it made me really sad. I like to take what we see happening in celebrity world. Like I told you before on this podcast, I don't want to just be like, like the gossip talk blogger. That's not what this is about. But whenever I come across stories like this, or when stories like this happen, I like to put what happens in celeb world into what happens for us as regular everyday people living our lives, right? My concern, though, and who I center on this podcast is always Black women. And so this conversation is going to center the Black woman who's at the center of all of it, which is Jada Pinkett Smith. A Black woman and mother. I want to talk about what seems to me to be this growing disdain of sorts. I don't know what it is exactly. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there just seems to be this growing disdain against Black women. I mostly see it online. It's not, and I have to say that, like, it's what I see happening online, conversations I see happening online mostly. I very rarely see this spill into my real, like, outside everyday living life. The men who are in my life are wonderful examples of men, friends, fathers, husbands. and I think they're all pretty much like reasonable and balanced people. But I'm concerned with what I'm seeing happen through media, because it speaks to what, like, the center of our community, what's happening, right? The thought processes, the cultural values that we're seeing. So everyone is going to come to this conversation with their own stuff. My own baggage is going to come out in this, I'm sure of it, right? My own experiences, the way I experience the world, the way I experience media, the way I experience my own community within the larger community. You're going to hear all of that come out. And so I just say that to say this is my own viewpoint. I don't expect you to like it or agree with it. I want to talk about it. Let's talk about it. But, it is what it is. So anyway, I always go back to what happens in history and how what Black people have experienced in this country, how that leads to where we are today, and the way that these types of issues show up in our lives. So anyway, slavery. It always goes back to slavery with Black people. Like, as much as we want to, like, call ourselves moved on from it, or, not see ourselves as descendants of that or whatever, like, the truth of the matter is a lot of what we are still dealing with today in terms of emotions and our values and in the way that shows up in our lives goes back to slavery. So we know that in slavery, Black people, enslaved people, they had to deal with a lot of brutality, a lot of beatings, rape, right? Our men could not stop that when it happened to us. They couldn't do that, stop it for themselves, and they could not stop it for their women without putting themselves in ultimate danger. And some did, despite the consequences, but most of the time they had to watch from a space of helplessness. And so when I think about what that says for Black women, that means that throughout the history of us being in this nation, we've had to get used to fighting our own battles and not having anyone step in for us. And because we are so accustomed to fighting through those battles and being okay on the other side of it, okay from an outside perspective, right? We're seen as strong and able to withstand harsh treatment that is stemming from this time period. People are not as apt to take up for Black women. And in some cases, they feel that because we're so strong, that it gives them license to disrespect and disregard us as women in the way that they see white women, meaning the fragility, the rush to rescue or save white women from the whatever boogeyman is out there for them, right? Black women do not get that same type of regard. Case in point, Kim Kardashian today, when we look at the story that's happening between her and her husband, Kanye West, and the sympathy that I see that is given to Kim, and it's deserved, right? He is being a maniac and he is treating her very ugly. And people need to speak up and say, this is not okay. But at the same time, when we look at how Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith, when we look at how their relationship is handled or spoke about in the media, and when I say media, I'm talking about all of it, right? The radio, the TV, the blogs, the social media conversations that are happening. Oftentimes Jada is villainized. And I think that without getting into their whole story, Will and Jada's stories and the ins and outs, because I don't think that the details are so important, but it's interesting to me to see Jada be villainized the way that she is. And it's especially interesting to me to see that happen from Black men and Black women. So that type of villainization of Jada Pinkett Smith leads to her showing up to the Oscars to support her husband at this huge moment in his life, and then jokes being told at her expense. The joke being the G.I. Jane joke, which alludes or refers to her low haircut, which those of us who follow Jada Pinkett Smith we were well aware that she's been, going through this transition with alopecia and the courageousness and bravery with which she has been meeting that publicly. But I also understand that most people did not know that, right? And as listening on Monday to The Breakfast Club, Charlemagne pointed out that he spoke to Chris Rock after the incident happened. And Chris Rock said he had absolutely no idea that. And, if he didn't know, he didn't know. But the point that I think is important right there is that this is why it is not in good taste, right? It's a bad idea to make jokes or to speak on people's appearances, because you never know what people are going through. So that's just my own thing there. So before I move on with this story, I'm gonna just reference a couple of stories from our past, or stories that have been told. The first being Beloved, the novel by renowned writer and author Toni Morrison. In Beloved is the story of Mother Sethi, who escapes slavery with her children, and she finds herself in this new place in life, and so I don't even want to get into the whole. Anyway, go check out Beloved if you haven't. Okay, there's a movie about it Oprah did back in like 1998 or 1999, and of course there is the novel. But so Sethi tells this story in the novel, or she recalls this moment where she was churning butter. Oh, am I still recording? Oh, where she was churning butter in a barn as part of her work day, and she was accosted and raped by some of the white men on the plantation, right? I think it's some overseers. I don't know that it was their slaveholder, but she's in there doing her work. She's accosted, she's raped, and her husband just happened to be in the barn hiding up in the rafters, right? She saw him, he saw her see her, she saw him see her. This happens. he can't do anything about it because he's terrified. And I'm sure shocked that he's even like that this is even happening, right? But then also knowing the cost that it would be to him. And so as she goes on to tell the story, after that moment, he became, in my own words, a babbling fool. He could not process the pain that he endured, having to watch her endure such a brutal process, a traumatizing experience onto her body, his wife, right? And so we're going to pause that there. Because when we go back to Will's story about how he watched his father beat his mother, couldn't do anything about it, the humiliation, the shame, and the guilt that he has carried for all these years with that, right? That's that same type of it's a maddening that happens when people experience that level of trauma. Then I also want to turn to Birth of a Nation. Birth of a Nation is the story about the Nat Turner Revolution. And in that movie, if you watch that movie, there was a scene where Gabrielle Union plays the wife of, they are enslaved people on this plantation. And she was dragged into the house, beaten up and raped by, again, another white man on the plantation. And so her husband and another man sat outside the house and listened to this go on, right? And so the plot of the story is that plus some other things that had been happening are that was the revenge, and that's why that revolution happened on that plantation. So I bring those stories up to say the purpose of media is to set the tone of acceptable and unacceptable ways to behave in larger society. Media, what we see in media, the purpose of television and radio and all of these outlets that bring us information is to have society be on one accord as much as possible. And so, which is why stories like this have to be told, right? Beloved and Birth of a Nation, so that there is some truth and some understanding to the things that we see playing out even today. Black women are seen as strong and able to endure harm, so harm continues to be piled onto us. And harm continues to be piled onto us in the way that we are treated, in the way that we are spoken to by the people who are closest to us, but also by who we encounter in our general society. We can see evidence of that by what we talked about earlier in the show. Judge Brown Jackson's SCOTUS hearing last week. That was a hazing by angry racists. It was not supposed to be. That is not what that arena is for, but that is what it was allowed to be turned into. And one could say, the way that I see it, is that she was absolutely disrespected in the context of her work. That's unacceptable. But it was allowed to play out on our media, and you have to ask yourself why, right? Brittany Griner is locked up, and there's no visible or no verbal campaign to ensure her safety or to ensure us as a nation, right? The people who are her fans and the people who are concerned about her safety and her well-being. There's nothing being said about her. There's very little being said about her. The story is not being followed the way that I imagine it would be followed if it were LeBron James across seas or Steph Curry, right? Someone across seas and this happened. The point being, it's almost like she's just being left to have to deal. Breonna Taylor murdered by police in her home and no justice outcome of that, right? Just a couple of weeks ago, the one police officer who was somewhat being held accountable was let off with no type of recourse for his actions in her murder. So it's just done. She's gone. Sandra Bland, murdered by police, allegedly, I have to say, I guess. But she was on her way to a new job. And my point is that, like, Breonna Taylor was at home going to bed that night. Sandra Bland was on her way to starting a new life in a new state. Numerous Black girl students that we have seen throughout the years being tossed around by police or by teachers or other authorities. I remember this story of a young girl who she wasn't responding to the teacher. So the teacher called the school officer into the room. And when she did not respond to the school officer, he picked her up and threw her body to the front of the classroom, tossed her. Disrespect and disregard for Black women and Black girls' lives, mental health, physical health, all of it. That young lady had just experienced the death of both her mother and her grandmother. They were her primary caretakers. They were the only two people. So she wasn't being disobedient. She was likely despondent because of her circumstances, but there was no consideration given to her for what might have been going on in her life. So this happens to Black women and Black young women and girls, not just physically, but in our workplaces, our schools, our neighborhoods, our homes, and little is said or done to protect us or to vindicate us when that harm is done. People feel that we are strong and that we should just be able to take it. And not only should we should be able to take it, but that it is our duty to take it with grace and composure, or that we should take it and be willing to teach other people how their harming us is harmful to us. We're treated as if they are examples to be made of us, keeping us in our place. That's the messaging, right? That is constantly reworked and retold when we see these things play out in the media. And so my view of what happened on Sunday night is that Will disrupted that messaging on that stage. Jokes or not, his wife was an innocent attendee there to support him. It was not a roast. It was not a comedy show. Jada was put in a position to be humiliated by a joke. And Will said, "Not my wife and not tonight." And he reacted. I believe, this is my own personal belief. This is not, take it or leave it, whatever. But Chris Rock that evening, when we understand the role of media and how it plays into the psyche of the American people, Chris Rock, as the host and as the person who was, I don't know if that was his own joke or if someone wrote that joke and it was fed to him. But at that point, Chris Rock is an agent of the mass media. There's levels to this. There's levels to everything, right? And so in that instance, Jada was seen as free game because of all of the talk that's been going on about their relationship and all that stuff, that Jada was seen as free game. And that's why that joke was written the way that it was. It was distasteful. It was disrespectful. It was calculated and done in a way that we don't see done to white women in those spaces. If you remember back in 2016, when Will Smith was not nominated for the movie Concussion, Jada Pinkett Smith made an online protest, and that's what started hashtag Oscars So White that year. Hollywood is petty. It was intended for her to feel uncomfortable that night, and Will said no. Again, I don't condone the way he did it, but that is what happened. And that is why I believe that action was so impulsive. I want to just leave you with some lyrics from the late and great Tupac Shakur, from his song, Keep Your Head Up. And he says, and He says, I know they like to beat you down a lot. When you come around the block, brothers clown a lot. But please don't cry, dry your eyes, never let up. Forgive, but don't forget. Girl, keep your head up. And when he tells you you ain't nothing, don't believe him. And then we fast forward through the song a little bit, and he says, but it's still in the same verse. I wonder why we take from our women, why we rape our women. Do we hate our women? I think it's time to kill for our women, time to heal our women, be real to our women. And if we don't, we'll have a race of babies that will hate the ladies that make the babies. That's where we are. That's where we are right now. We have the race of babies that hate the ladies that make the babies. And that is why we're seeing so many people turn Jada into the villain in this instance. I don't even understand that, right? But again, why people feel, or why we live in a society that hates on Black women and feels justified and righteous in disrespecting and disregarding us and doing it continuously and loudly and boldly and in our faces. I'm not mad at the slap at all. It is what it is. Everyone will have to take care of themselves, and I'm sure they will. They are multimillionaire billionaires. They're going to be good. So until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.